The Convair B-36 Peacemaker was a strategic bomber built by Convair and operated solely by the United States Air Force, U.S. Air Force, from 1949 to 1959. The B-36 is the largest mass-produced piston-engined aircraft ever built. It had the longest wingspan of any combat aircraft ever built, at 230 feet, 70.1 m. The B-36 was the first bomber capable of delivering any of the nuclear weapons in the U.S. arsenal from inside its 4 bomb bays without aircraft modifications. With a range of 10,000 miles, 16,000 kilometers, and a maximum payload of 87,200 pounds, 39,600 kilograms, the B-36 was capable of intercontinental flight without refueling. Entering service in 1948, the B-36 was the primary nuclear weapons delivery vehicle of the Strategic Air Command, SAC, until it was replaced by the jet-powered Boeing B-52 Stratofortress beginning in 1955. All but 5 examples were scrapped. Development. The genesis of the B-36 can be traced to early 1941, prior to the entry of the United States into World War II. At the time it appeared there was a very real chance that Britain might fall to the German Blitz, making a strategic bombing effort by the United States Army Air Corps, USAC, against Germany impossible with the aircraft of the time. The United States would need a new class of bomber which would reach Europe and return to bases in North America, necessitating a combat range of at least 5,700 miles, 9,200 kilometers, the length of a Gander, Newfoundland-Berlin round trip. The USAC therefore sought a bomber of truly intercontinental range, similar to the German RLM's ultra-long-range America bomber program, the subject of a 33-page proposal submitted to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring on May 12, 1942. The USAC sent out the initial request on April 11, 1941, asking for a 450 miles per hour, 720 kilometers per hour, top speed, a 275 miles per hour, 443 kilometers per hour, cruising speed, a service ceiling of 45,000 feet, 14,000 m, beyond the range of ground-based anti-aircraft fire, and a maximum range of 12,000 miles, 19,000 kilometers, at 25,000 feet, 7,600 m. These requirements proved too demanding for any short-term design far exceeding the technology of the day, so on August 19, 1941 they were reduced to a maximum range of 10,000 miles, 16,000 kilometers, an effective combat radius of 4,000 miles, 6,400 kilometers, with a 10,000 pounds, 4,500 kilograms, bomb load, a cruising speed between 240 and 300 miles per hour, 390 and 480 kilometers per hour, and a service ceiling of 40,000 feet, 12,000 m, above the maximum effective altitude of all of Nazi Germany's anti-aircraft flak guns, save for the rarely deployed 12.8 cm flak 40 heavy flak cannon. World War II and after. As the Pacific War progressed, the Air Force increasingly needed a bomber capable of reaching Japan from its bases in Hawaii, and the development of the B-36 resumed in earnest. Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson, in discussions with high-ranking officers of the USAF, decided to waive normal Army procurement procedures, and on July 23, 1943, some 15 months after the Germans' America bomber proposal's submission made it to their RLM authority, the USAF submitted a letter of intent to Convair, ordering an initial production run of 100 B-36s before the completion and testing of the 2 prototypes. The first delivery was due in August 1945, and the last in October 1946, but consolidated, by this time renamed Convair after its 1943 merger with Vultee Aircraft, delayed delivery. The aircraft was unveiled on August 20, 1945, 3 months after VE Day, and flew for the first time on August 8, 1946. After the establishment of an independent United States Air Force in 1947, the beginning in earnest of the Cold War with the 1948 Berlin airlift, and the 1949 atmospheric test of the first Soviet atomic bomb, American military planners sought bombers capable of delivering the very large and heavy first-generation atomic bombs. The B-36 was the only American aircraft with the range and payload to carry such bombs from airfields on American soil to targets in the USSR. The modification to allow the use of larger atomic weapons on the B-36 was called the Grand Slam installation. The B-36 was arguably obsolete from the outset, being piston-powered, coupled with the widespread introduction of first-generation jet fighters in potential enemy air forces. But its jet rival, the Boeing B-47 Stratojet, which did not become fully operational until 1953, lacked the range to attack the Soviet homeland from North America without aerial refueling and could not carry the huge first-generation Mark 16 hydrogen bomb. The other American piston bombers of the day, the B-29 and B-50, were also too limited in range and nuclear arsenal. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, did not become sufficiently reliable until the early 1960s. Until the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress became operational in 1955, the B-36, as the only truly intercontinental bomber, continued to be the primary nuclear weapons delivery vehicle of the Strategic Air Command, SAC. Convair touted the B-36 as the aluminum overcast, a so-called long rifle giving SAC truly global reach. During General Curtis LeMay's tenure as head of SAC, 1949-57, the B-36, through intense crew training and development, formed the heart of the Strategic Air Command. Its maximum payload was more than 4 times that of the B-29, and exceeded that of the B-52. The B-36 was slow and could not refuel in midair, but could fly missions to targets 3,400 miles, 5,500 kilometers, away and stay aloft as long as 40 hours. Moreover, the B-36 was believed to have an ace up its sleeve, a phenomenal cruising altitude for a piston-driven aircraft, made possible by its huge wing area and 6 28-cylinder engines, putting it out of range of most of the interceptors of the day, as well as ground-based anti-aircraft guns. Experimentals and prototypes. Consolidated Vultee Aircraft Corporation, later Convair, and Boeing Aircraft Company took part in the competition, with Consolidated winning a tender on October 16, 1941. Consolidated asked for a $15 million contract with $800,000 for research and development, mock-up, and tooling. 2 experimental bombers were proposed, the first to be delivered in 30 months, and the second within another 6 months. Originally designated Model B-35, the name was changed to B-36 to avoid confusion with the Northrop YB-35 piston-engined flying wing bomber, against which the B-36 was meant to compete for a production contract. Throughout its development, the B-36 would encounter delays. When the United States entered World War II, Consolidated was ordered to slow B-36 development and greatly increase Consolidated B-24 Liberator production. The first mock-up was inspected on July 20, 1942, following 6 months of refinements. A month after the inspection, the project was moved from San Diego, California, to Fort Worth, Texas, which set back development several months. Consolidated changed the tail from a twin tail to a single, thereby saving 3,850 pounds, 1,750 kilograms, but this change delayed delivery by 120 days. The tricycle landing gear system's initial main gear design, with huge single wheels found to cause significant ground pressure problems, limited the B-36 to operating from just 3 air bases in the United States, Carswell Field, former Carswell AFB, now NASJRB Fort Worth/Carswell Field, adjacent to the Consolidated factory in Fort Worth, Texas, Eglin Field, now Eglin AFB, Florida, and Fairfield Sassoon Field, now Travis AFB, in California. As a result, the Air Force mandated that Consolidated design a 4-wheeled bogie-type wheel system for each main gear unit instead, which distributed the pressure more evenly and reduced weight by 1,500 pounds, 680 kilograms. Changes in the United States Army Air Forces, USAF, requirements would add back any weight saved in redesigns, and cost more time. A new antenna system needed to be designed to accommodate an ordered radio and radar system. The Pratt & Whitney engines were redesigned, adding another 1,000 pounds, 450 kilograms. Design. The B-36 took shape as an aircraft of immense proportions. It was 2/3 longer than the previous super bomber, the B-29. The wingspan and tail height of the B-36 exceeded those of the 1960s Soviet Union's Antonov An-22 Antheus military transport, the largest ever propeller-driven aircraft put into production. Only with the advent of the Boeing 747 and the Lockheed C-5 Galaxy, both designed 2 decades later, did American aircraft capable of lifting a heavier payload become commonplace. The wings of the B-36 were large even when compared with present-day aircraft, exceeding, for example, those of the C-5 Galaxy, and enabled the B-36 to carry enough fuel to fly the intended long missions without refueling. The maximum thickness of the wing, measured perpendicular to the chord, was 7.5 feet, 2.3 m, thick, containing a crawl space that allowed access to the engines. The wing area permitted cruising altitudes well above the operating ceiling of any 1940s-era operational piston and jet turbine fighters. Most versions of the B-36 could cruise at over 40,000 feet, 12,000 m. B-36 mission logs commonly recorded mock attacks against U.S. cities while flying at 49,000 feet, 15,000 m. In 1954, the turrets and other non-essential equipment were removed, not entirely unlike the earlier Silver Plate program for the atomic bomb-carrying specialist B-29S, that resulted in a featherweight configuration believed to have resulted in a top speed of 423 miles per hour, 681 kilometers per hour, and cruise at 50,000 feet, 15,000 m, and dash at over 55,000 feet, 17,000 m, perhaps even higher. The large wing area and the option of starting the 4 jet engines supplementing the piston engines in later versions gave the B-36 a wide margin between stall speed, Vs, and maximum speed, Vmax, at these altitudes. This made the B-36 more maneuverable at high altitude than the U.S. Air Force jet interceptors of the day, which either could not fly above 40,000 feet, 12,000 m, or if they did, were likely to stall out when trying to maneuver or fire their guns. However, the U.S. Navy argued that their McDonnell F-2H Banshee fighter could intercept the B-36, thanks to its ability to operate at more than 50,000 feet, 15,000 m. The U.S. Air Force declined the invitation from the U.S. Navy for a fly-off between the Banshee and the B-36. Later, the new Secretary of Defense, Louis A. Johnson, who considered the U.S. Navy and naval aviation essentially obsolete in favor of the U.S. Air Force and Strategic Air Command, forbade putting the Navy's claim to the test. The propulsion system of the B-36 was unique, with 6 28-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R4360 Wasp major radial engines mounted in an unusual pusher configuration, rather than the conventional 4-engine, tractor propeller layout of other heavy bombers. The prototype R4360s delivered a total of 18,000 HP, 13,000 kilowatts. While early B-36s required long takeoff runs, this situation was improved with later versions, delivering a significantly increased power output of 22,800 HP, 17,000 kilowatts, total. Each engine drove a 3-bladed propeller, 19 feet, 5.8 m, in diameter, mounted in the pusher configuration, thought to be the second largest diameter propeller design ever used to power a piston-engined aircraft. This unusual configuration prevented propeller turbulence from interfering with airflow over the wing, but could also lead to engine overheating due to insufficient airflow around the engines, resulting in in-flight engine fires. The large, slow-turning propellers interacted with the high-pressure airflow behind the wings to produce an easily recognizable very low-frequency pulse at ground level that betrayed approaching flights. Addition of jet propulsion. Beginning with the B-36D, Convair added a pair of General Electric J47-19 jet engines suspended near the end of each wing. These were also retrofitted to all extant B-36Bs. Consequently, the B-36 was configured to have 10 engines, 6 radial propeller engines and 4 jet engines, leading to the B-36 slogan of 6 Tonnen and 4 Brunnen. The B-36 had more engines than any other mass-produced aircraft. The jet pods greatly improved takeoff performance and dash speed over the target. In normal cruising flight, the jet engines were shut down to conserve fuel. When the jet engines were shut down, louvers closed off the front of the pods to reduce drag and to prevent ingestion of sand and dirt. The jet engine louvers were opened and closed by the flight crew in the cockpit, whether the B-36 was on the ground or in the air. The 2 pods with 4 turbojets and the 6 piston engines combined gave the B-36 a total of 40,000 HP, 30,000 kilowatts, for short periods of time. Crew. The B-36 had a crew of 15. As in the B-29 and B-50, the pressurized flight deck and crew compartment were linked to the rear compartment by a pressurized tunnel through the bomb bay. In the B-36, movement through the tunnel was on a wheeled trolley, pulling on a rope. The rear compartment featured 6 bunks and a dining galley, and led to the tail turret. Landing gear. The XB-36 featured a single-wheel main landing gear whose tires were the largest ever manufactured up to that time, 9 feet 2 inches, 2.79 m, tall, 3 feet, 91 centimeters, wide, and weighing 1,320 pounds, 600 kilograms, with enough rubber for 60 automobile tires. These tires placed so much pressure on runways, that the XB-36 was restricted to the Fort Worth airfield adjacent to the plant of manufacture, and to a mere 2 U.S. Air Force bases beyond that. At the suggestion of General Henry H. Arnold, the single-wheel gear was soon replaced by a 4-wheel bogie. At one point, a tank-like tracked landing gear was also tried on the XB-36, but it proved heavy and noisy. The tracked landing gear was quickly abandoned. Weaponry. The 4 bomb bays could carry up to 86,000 pounds, 39,000 kilograms, of bombs, more than 10 times the load carried by the World War II workhorse, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, and substantially more than the entire B-17's gross weight. The B-36 was not designed with nuclear weaponry in mind, because the mere existence of such weapons was top secret during the period when the B-36 was conceived and designed, 1941-46. Nevertheless, the B-36 stepped into its nuclear delivery role immediately upon becoming operational. In all respects except speed, the B-36 could match what was arguably its approximate Soviet counterpart, the turboprop-powered Tu-95, which began production in January 1956 and was still in active service as of June 2016. Until the B-52 became operational, the B-36 was the only means of delivering the first-generation Mark 17 hydrogen bomb, 25 feet, 7.6 m, long, 5 feet, 1.5 m, in diameter, and weighing 42,000 pounds, 19,000 kilograms, the heaviest and bulkiest American aerial nuclear bomb ever. Carrying this massive weapon required merging 2 adjacent bomb bays. The defensive armament consisted of 6 remote-controlled retractable gun turrets, and fixed tail and nose turrets. Each turret was fitted with 2 20mm cannons, for a total of 16. Recoil vibration from gunnery practice often caused the aircraft's electrical wiring to jar loose or the vacuum tube electronics to malfunction, leading to failure of the aircraft controls and navigation equipment. This contributed to the crash of B-36 B-44 to 92,035 on November 22, 1950. The Convair B-36 was the only aircraft designed to carry the T-12 Cloudmaker, a gravity bomb weighing 43,600 pounds, 19,800 kilograms, and designed to produce an earthquake bomb effect. Part of the testing process involved dropping 2 of the bombs on a single flight mission, one from 30,000 feet and the second from 40,000 feet, for a total bomb load of 87,200 pounds. The first prototype XB-36 flew on August 8, 1946. The speed and range of the prototype failed to meet the standards set out by the Army Air Corps in 1941. This was expected, as the Pratt & Whitney R4360 engines required were not yet available, and there was a lack of the qualified workers and materials needed to install them. A second aircraft, the YB-36, flew on December 4, 1947. It had a redesigned high visibility, yet still greenhouse-like bubble canopy, heavily framed due to its substantial size, which was later adopted for production, and the engines used on the YB-36 were a good deal more powerful and more efficient. Altogether, the YB-36 was much closer to the production aircraft. The first of 21 B-36s were delivered in 1948. They were interim airframes, intended for crew training and later conversion. No defensive armament was fitted, since none was ready. Once later models were available, all B-36s were converted to RB-36E reconnaissance models. The first B-36 variant meant for normal operation was the B-36B, delivered beginning in November 1948. This aircraft met all the 1941 requirements, but had serious problems with engine reliability and maintenance. Changing the 336 spark plugs was a task dreaded by ground crews, and with the availability of armaments and spare parts. Later models featured more powerful variants of the R-4360 engine, improved radar, and redesigned crew compartments. The four jet engines increased fuel consumption and reduced range. The advent of air-to-air missiles then rendered conventional gun turrets obsolete. In February 1954, the U.S. Air Force awarded Convair a contract for a new featherweight design program which significantly reduced weight and crew size. There were three configurations. Featherweight I removed defensive hardware, including the 6-gun turrets. Featherweight 2 removed the rear compartment crew comfort features, and all hardware accommodating the McDonnell XF-85 Goblin parasite fighter. Featherweight 3 incorporated both configurations I and II. The 6 turrets eliminated by Featherweight I reduced the aircraft's crew from 15 to 9. Featherweight 3 had a longer range and an operating ceiling of at least 47,000 feet, 14,000 m, especially valuable for reconnaissance missions. The B-36J3 configuration, the last 14 made, had a single radar-aimed tail turret, extra fuel tanks in the outer wings, and landing gear allowing the maximum gross weight to rise to 410,000 pounds, 190,000 kilograms. Production of the B-36 ceased in 1954. Operating and financial problems. Due to problems that occurred with the B-36 in its early stages of testing, development, and later in service, some critics referred to the aircraft as a billion-dollar blunder. In particular, the United States Navy saw it as a costly bungle, diverting congressional funding and interest from naval aviation and aircraft carriers in general, and carrier-based nuclear bombers in particular. In 1947, the Navy attacked congressional funding for the B-36, alleging it failed to meet Pentagon requirements. The U.S. Navy held to the preeminence of the aircraft carrier in the Pacific during World War II, presuming carrier-based aircraft would be decisive in future wars. To this end, the Navy designed the USS United States, CVA-58, a supercarrier capable of launching huge fleets of tactical aircraft or nuclear bombers. It then pushed to have funding transferred from the B-36 to the USS United States. The Air Force successfully defended the B-36 project, and the United States was officially cancelled by Secretary of Defense Louis A. Johnson in a cost-cutting move. Several high-level Navy officials questioned the government's decision, alleging a conflict of interest because Johnson had once served on Convair's board of directors. The uproar following the cancellation of United States in 1949 was nicknamed the Revolt of the Admirals. The furor, as well as the significant use of aircraft carriers in the Korean War, resulted in the design and procurement of the subsequent Forrestal class of supercarriers, which were of comparable size to the United States, but with a design geared towards greater multi-role use with composite air wings of fighter, attack, reconnaissance, electronic warfare, early warning, and anti-submarine warfare aircraft. At the same time, heavy manned bombers for the Strategic Air Command were also deemed crucial to national defense and, as a result, the two systems were never again in competition for the same budgetary resources. Operational history. The B-36, including its GRB-36, RB-36, and XC-99 variants, was in U.S. Air Force service as part of the Strategic Air Command from 1948 to 1959. The RB-36 variants of the B-36 were used for reconnaissance during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and the B-36 bomber variants conducted training and test operations and stood ground and airborne alert, but the latter variants were never used offensively as bombers against hostile forces. It never fired a shot in combat. Maintenance. The Wasp major engines had a prodigious appetite for lubricating oil. Each engine required a dedicated 100-gal, 380 liters, tank. Normal maintenance consisted of tedious measures, like changing the 56 spark plugs on each of the 6 engines. The plugs were often fouled by the lead in the 145-octane anti-knock fuel required by the R-4360 engines. Thus, each service required changing 336 spark plugs. Another frequent maintenance job was replacing the dozens of Bombay light bulbs, which routinely shattered during test firing of the turret guns. The B-36 was too large to fit in most hangars. Since even an aircraft with the range of the B-36 needed to be stationed as close to enemy targets as possible, this meant the plane was largely based in the extreme weather locations of the northern continental United States, Alaska, and the Arctic. Since the maintenance had to be performed outdoors, the crews were largely exposed to the elements, with temperatures of 60 degrees F, 51 degrees C, in winters and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, in summers, depending on the airbase location. Special shelters were built so that the maintenance crews could be given a modicum of protection. Ground crews were at risk of slipping and falling from icy wings, or being blown off the wings by propeller wash running in reverse pitch. The wing roots were thick enough, at 7 feet, 2.1 m, to enable a flight engineer to access the engines and landing gear during flight by crawling through the wings. This was possible only at altitudes not requiring pressurization. In 1950, Convair, then still Consolidated Vultee, developed streamlined pods, looking like oversized drop tanks, that were mounted on each side of the B-36's fuselage to carry spare engines between bases. Each pod could airlift 2 engines. When the pods were empty, they were removed and carried in the bomb bays. There is no record of the special engine pods ever being used. Engine fires. As engine fires occurred with the B-36's radial engines, some crews humorously changed the aircraft's slogan from 6 turning, 4 burning into 2 turning, 2 burning, 2 smoking, 2 choking, and 2 more unaccounted for. This problem was exacerbated by the propeller's pusher configuration, which increased carburetor icing. The design of the R-4360 engine tacitly assumed that it would be mounted in the conventional tractor configuration propeller/air intake/28 cylinders/carburetor with air flowing in that order. In this configuration, the carburetor is bathed in warmed air flowing past the engine, and so is unlikely to ice up. However, the R-4360 engines in the B-36 were mounted backwards, in the pusher configuration air intake/carburetor/28 cylinders/propeller. The carburetor was now in front of the engine and so could not benefit from engine heat, and also made more traditional short-term carburetor heat systems unsuitable. Hence, when intake air was cold and humid, ice gradually obstructed the carburetor air intake, which in turn gradually increased the richness of the air/fuel mixture until the unburned fuel in the exhaust caught fire. 3 engine fires of this nature led to the first loss of an American nuclear weapon. Crew experience. Training missions were typically in 2 parts. First, a 40-hour flight followed by some time on the ground for refueling and maintenance, then a 24-hour second flight. With a sufficiently light load, the B-36 could fly at least 10,000 miles, 16,000 kilometers, non-stop, and the highest cruising speed of any version, the B-36J3, was at 230 miles per hour, 380 kilometers per hour. Engaging the jet engines could raise the cruising speed to over 400 miles per hour, 650 kilometers per hour. Hence a 40-hour mission, with the jets used only for takeoff and climbing, flew about 9,200 miles, 15,000 kilometers. Given the massive size of the plane, its overall performance was never considered sprightly or agile. Lieutenant General James Edmundson likened it to sitting on your front porch and flying your house around. Despite its immense exterior size, the pressurized crew compartments were relatively cramped, especially when occupied for 24 hours by a crew of 15 in full flight kit. War missions would have been one way, taking off from forward bases in Alaska or Greenland, overflying the USSR, with survivors landing in Europe, North Africa, Morocco, or the Middle East. Recollections of crew veterans reveal that, while crews were confident of their ability to complete a mission, they were less confident of surviving the weapon delivery itself. Their concerns were about dropping extremely powerful bombs from a relatively slow-moving aircraft, leaving the aircraft within blast range. Their concerns were borne out during the 1954 Operation Castle tests. Here B-36s were flown at the combat distance from the detonations of bombs in the 15 megaton range. At distances believed typical of wartime delivery, the aircraft suffered extensive flash and blast damage. Experiments. The B-36 was employed in a variety of aeronautical experiments throughout its service life. Its immense size, range, and payload capacity lent itself to use in research and development programs. These included nuclear propulsion studies, and parasite programs in which the B-36 carried smaller interceptors or reconnaissance aircraft. In May 1946, the Air Force began the Nuclear Energy for the Propulsion of Aircraft (NEPA) project, which was followed in May 1951 by the Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion (ANP) program. The ANP program used modified B-36s to study shielding requirements for an airborne reactor to determine whether a nuclear-powered aircraft was feasible. Convair modified two B-36s under the MX-1589 project. The Nuclear Test Aircraft, NTA, was a B-36H-20CF, serial number 51-5712, that had been damaged in a tornado at Carswell AFB on September 1, 1952. This aircraft, designated the XB-36H, and later NB-36H, was modified to carry a 1 MW, air-cooled nuclear reactor in the aft bomb bay, with a 4-ton lead disc shield installed in the middle of the aircraft between the reactor and the cockpit. A number of large air intake and exhaust holes were installed in the sides and bottom of the aircraft's rear fuselage to cool the reactor in flight. On the ground, a crane would be utilized to remove the 35,000 pounds, 16,000 kilograms, reactor from the aircraft. To protect the crew, the highly modified cockpit was encased in lead and rubber, with a 1-foot thick, 30 centimeters, leaded glass windshield. The reactor was operational, but did not power the aircraft. Its sole purpose was to investigate the effect of radiation on aircraft systems. Between 1955 and 1957, the NB-36H completed 47 test flights and 215 hours of flight time, during 89 of which the reactor was critical. Other experiments involved providing the B-36 with its own fighter defense in the form of parasite aircraft carried partially or wholly in a bomb bay. One parasite aircraft was the diminutive McDonnell XF-85 Goblin, which docked using a trapeze system. The concept was tested successfully using a B-29 carrier, but docking proved difficult even for experienced test pilots. Moreover, the XF-85 was seen as no match for contemporary foreign powers' newly developed interceptor aircraft in development and in service. Consequently, the project was cancelled. More successful was the Falcon project, involving a modified B-36, called a GRB-36D mothership, and the RF-84K, a fighter modified for reconnaissance, in a bomb bay. The GRB-36D would ferry the RF-84K to the vicinity of the objective, whereupon the RF-84K would disconnect and begin its mission. 10 GRB-36DS and 25 RF-84KS were built and saw limited service in 1955–1956. Projects Tiptoe and TomTom involved docking F-84S to the wingtips of B-29S and B-36S. The hope was that the increased aspect ratio of the combined aircraft would result in a greater range. Project Tiptoe was cancelled when an F-84D and a specially modified test EB-29A crashed, killing everyone on both aircraft. This accident was attributed to the F-84D flipping over onto the wing of the EB-29A. Project Tom Tom, involving RF-84FS and a GRB-36D from the Falcon project, redesignated JRB-36F, continued for a few months after this crash, but was also cancelled due to the violent turbulence induced by the wingtip vortices of the B-36. Strategic reconnaissance. One of the SAC's initial missions was to plan strategic aerial reconnaissance on a global scale. The first efforts were in photo reconnaissance and mapping. Along with the photo reconnaissance mission, a small electronic intelligence, ELINT, cadre was operating. Weather reconnaissance was part of the effort, as was long-range detection, the search for Soviet atomic explosions. In the late 1940s, strategic intelligence on Soviet capabilities and intentions was scarce. Before the development of the Lockheed U-2 high-altitude spy plane and orbital reconnaissance satellites, Corona technology and politics limited American reconnaissance efforts to the borders, and not the heartland, of the Soviet Union. One of the essential criteria of the early post-war reconnaissance aircraft was the ability to cruise above 40,000 feet, 12,000 m, a level determined by knowledge of the capability of Soviet air defense.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.